This is Joe Dancy with the University of Oklahoma College of Law Energy Center.
Outstanding. Thanks for joining us today. And before we get into the price of steel and some of the things that are going to impact Shale Play USA, as I like to call it, let's talk about the conference you were just at. Which conference down in Texas were you just visiting? Or you spoke at? I'm sorry, you spoke at it.
I spoke at it, and I actually visited probably more than I spoke, but it was the Hart Energy Conference out in Midland, and it was really aimed at the midstream, the pipeliners. And boy, Jason, it's the pipeliners have a real interesting field to play on right now, because the producers out there are just going wild with their wells, the new production, and pipeliners are having a hard time catching up. But the Hart people had a 2-day program at the Horseshoe Arena there in Midland, and I'd never been there. Horseshoe Arena is a beautiful brand new facility, and the conference was very well done.
My understanding is the pipeline has created the word bottleneck in the media more and more. Was that discussed at all, the word bottleneck?
Yeah, actually, the entire day of conference speakers, it came up numerous times. What we have, and actually this is a problem that's going to last for 18 to 24 months, is the producers have been so prolific bringing on all these extremely productive wells that the takeaway capacity actually is going to fall short here, starting about right now for the next 6 months to 2 years. And so they're actually talking, and here's a job for you, is they're actually talking about trucking, because of the shortfall, they can't get it into a pipeline. They can either take it by train, and of course the problem is, Jason, with the trains are full of sand, and so you have issues with regard to the train availability. But they're even talking about getting drivers to truck the oil from Midland down to the Gulf Coast, which that's not a short drive, and a truck doesn't haul all that much oil, and you're talking about a pretty good shortfall of oil, but that's an alternative that you can. It's actually because of the discrepancy between the price of oil in Midland now and the price of oil on the Gulf Coast. You can actually put it in a big tanker truck, haul it down, unload it, pay the driver. Actually, there's an article in Bloomberg and in Rig Zone yesterday where brand new truck drivers, you got a 2-year junior college education, but you get a certificate to be able to drive a truck. Some of the truck drivers are making $140,000 a year right out of school, and which is interesting. I don't know how long that's going to last, but hey, if the economics work, it may last. At least from what I heard yesterday, at least 12 months and maybe 2 years. And the discrepancy in price, just to give you a feel, is between what you get for a barrel of oil delivered in Midland to your facilities to the Gulf Coast is somewhere between $20 and $30 a barrel. So you have $20 or $30. If you can ship it for less than $20. You'll make a profit. Now, how much, Lord knows, but which is a big incentive for, obviously, the cheapest way is pipelines, and that's the way we're going. But you just can't, as you know, like even in the Bakken, you just can't go out and put in a pipeline. You got to get right away. You got to get approvals. You got to get permits. You got to get financing. You got to get people to commit and make sure they have enough. Enough volume to, you don't put a pipeline in and amortize it in 2 months. It's a long-term capital expenditure. So there's a lot involved, and there's a lot of hustle. Boy, Midland is a very dynamic area, and the Hart Conference was very dynamic. Just walking around talking to people, you could tell things are moving, which is pretty exciting.
Couple things I wrote down I want to unpack, if you will. Truckers to the Gulf, that's very interesting to me for a couple reasons. One is I talked to Dr. Lawrence Scott about a month ago, I guess, and he was talking about something similar to where in Louisiana and other areas too, they were actively and openly hiring female ex-felons just because they couldn't find anyone else to fill the role of truck driver. So that kind of little niche sub-demographic kind of came out in Louisiana as a story. I thought that was rather interesting. The female ex-felons they were recruiting for truck driving. But when you talk about putting them in the ground or putting it in the truck and then trucking it down to the port of Corpus Christi, if you will, the old thought, at least in my mind, used to be if it wasn't economical or logistical, you just keep it in the ground. And that's the best storage for it. But it sounds to me like they're making enough money or there's enough energy activity going to where, you know what, trucking it to Corpus Christi is the best method at this time. Talk to me a little bit about that. Keep it in the ground, how that's just doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
You know, I like that concept, and actually, I will tell you, driving on I-20 coming back to Dallas, there were a number. I looked off on the distance, and if I had some time, I was going to go explore. But they're building just massive storage tanks. In addition to everything else that's out there, and you can see the cranes, and you can see. I mean, these were not small ones either. These were huge storage facilities. But I think what's happened, Jason, is obviously the producers, probably have outrun, the pipeline capacity. And of course, the pipeliners, are usually they're a different company than the producers. And the producers have just, with the capital, with the technology, with the laterals, with the massive amount of sands, with the water, the initial production tests are getting better and better, and the production curves are looking better and better. So I think what has happened, I know what's happened from just listening to the people, is the producers just floored it, and the car's going a lot faster than they thought. And so, and the problem, as you know, when you get sort of to the incremental barrel where you don't have room to stick it in the pipeline because you don't have firm capacity for it, the value goes, substantially down, and it's going to impact not only the Permian prices there. There is a spread right now between West Texas and Brent of about $10. There's a spread between Midland prices and West Texas of maybe $20. The incremental additional barrel is really depreciated, or the value is much lower until the pipelines catch up. And I guess that's the second issue, is how fast will the pipelines catch up. And I guarantee you, you can probably imagine, I didn't really do the calculation, but trucking is a short-term solution, and you can't move a whole lot of oil with trucks. And just because you don't have the trucks, you don't have the drivers, you would have to maybe by train. But again, talking to the people there and hearing the speakers, a lot of them said, these trains are pretty much with the sand are pretty much tied up, and to get the trains transportation in place, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some money too. A lot of times, these railroad companies, they're making a lot of money with the sand, and why would they screw around starting to transport oil unless you wrote some big checks? And the other thing, looking from a railroad standpoint, is hey, if this only lasts 2 years, why should we spend a whole bunch of capital, building some storage terminals and loading terminals and everything else, and buying new cars, tank cars, when it's all going to be solved by pipelines in 2 years anyway, which is what the projection appears to be for most people. They say, hey, this is a problem, and it's going to get bigger. They said the discrepancy between what you're getting in West Texas or in Midland or with West Texas versus the Brent crude is that number is going to get bigger. And I've heard that at the conference. I've seen that. I think Raymond James had a report out, or a couple reports in the last couple of weeks, which means this is money from heaven for refiners, because essentially they're using West Texas Intermediate. You got a $10 or maybe more here going into the future advantage over every other refinery in the world, where they're all using Brent crude over in Europe, in Asia, and you can refine in the Houston or Louisiana coast, U.S. crude, ship it, or just send out the crude itself. You can actually, it doesn't cost $10 a barrel to move oil from Houston to Europe. So it's going to be exciting for refiners as well as producers, and as well as midstream, the pipeline firms. But there are some problems between now and when our pipeline capacity shortage gets fixed.
We'll talk about rail in just a moment. I just wanted to touch one more time on the pipeline part. Of course, Joe Dancy with us. He was at the Energy Conference, the Hart Energy Conference yesterday at the, would you say it was the Horseshoe Pavilion?
The Horseshoe Pavilion, and it's a beautiful facility. I was really surprised. I shouldn't have been, just because Midland is so dynamic, but it's brand new and it's a good-sized facility. It's they can hold a big party there.
Yeah, I think there's a few more conferences coming up there. I was noticing in the next summer, and so I'm going to keep your eyes on that, folks, as far as what's going to be at the Horseshoe Pavilion. With the Permian to the port of Corpus Christi is what I wrote down here. Permian to port of Corpus Christi. I almost got a tongue twister there for a second. But was that discussed at all? I mean, you mentioned it early on that this should be solved, or this should be satisfied over the next 18 to 24 months. Was that what you were talking about, is these like direct pipelines that are going to be built right to the port of Christi?
Well, there's actually a number of pipelines that are being proposed and are in the process of being built. But the takeaway, I mean, from the numbers I saw, I mean, they're short, they'll be short within the next year, like 100 to 200,000 barrels per day, which is a pretty good size shortfall. But one of the problems, Jason, and this just shocked me, and actually it shocked some of the people at the table I was sitting with when we had a speakers dinner the night before, is the cost of steel has gone up 50% from the beginning of the year, and it's because of the tariffs. And actually I knew this. I know manufacturers are having, equipment manufacturing are having to increase their prices due to steel costs. But the price of a section of pipe apparently is the steel in it is gone up 50%. I think the numbers, the rolled steel prices have gone up. I think the chart I saw went from 600 to 900 between the first of the year and now, which is not too long. And apparently, from what I heard, is about 25% of your cost of a pipeline is steel. And I mean, part of it's obviously labor, part of it's right away, part of it's all the equipment you stick on there, the pumps, but 25% is steel. So if steel goes up 50%, you're dealing with projects that would have been built in a heartbeat last year they don't look as attractive now, even with the spread in oil prices. And this is sort of humorous. One of the guys I talked to was a finance person in the energy sector out of Houston, and he said they actually agreed to build or buy a pipeline, and they ran the economic model and actually bid and got it all put in place, but they didn't lock down their steel prices. So because when we did the initial model using last year's steel prices, it was going to be a gold mine. We were going to make, he goes, with steel prices where they're at now, he goes, if we break even, we'll be lucky. So because we're already committed. So he goes, this is like my retirement. And now, steel prices have really thrown a wrench in projects. So he goes, unfortunately, you hear that story and you realize to do the build out, if you have more expensive pipe and actually have problems getting people, to install it, the skilled labor, the problem's not going to be solved quite as quickly as you otherwise would like. And I guess sort of to go along with that, a couple of the other speakers noted that the finance people, Lord forbid, are not really wild about the midstream or pipeline area right now as far as just financing. The public's not wild about them. They say the amount of money that's been raised for midstream projects is way down compared to what it's been historically. So, and why that is, I'm not sure. It's just out of favor, and it has been last couple years. But they said, so not only do you have increasing costs, but you don't have a whole bunch of financiers. I mean, everybody apparently in New York that wants to do anything in the Permian Basin, they want to buy into the producers end of things, the layer cake of geology that's going to be out there for ages, and the pipeline end of things, they're much more cautious on. And I did hear a number of times, I guess one of the concerns is that if everybody goes into a frenzy of building, they will actually overbuild to take away capacity and of course, again, just like anything else, when you have that incremental excess capacity, the value goes way down. So they're concerned that some of these, if things get too frenzied building out the systems, they may not get the returns they expect.
This reminds me of a story, and this is, by the way, this could be a real serious problem that if it doesn't get addressed or corrected, it could cause a hiccup. And this happened back in 2013, and I can't remember if it was asphalt or if it was steel or something caused the price of shingles and like nails and a lot of building construction to just like double from when they originally started the project. A guy breaks ground, starts project. When it gets to time to do the roof, the shingles and the nails are double the price of what they originally projected it out to be 9-12 months earlier, much like your example about the guy didn't lock in the price of steel, and well, now he's just got to deal with it. That to me, that's happened historically on different things, to where people building apartments and those types of things in the oil patch up in the Bakken, they got bit by that. And the way you were talking a little bit about it, people are building these pipes and this and that might come back and bite them a little bit. I can see why some investors are a little bit leery now with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I know, there has been takeaway capacity issues. I know in the Bakken, I think up in the Bakken from, of course, this was not necessarily Texas focused, but I didn't hear hardly any discussion yesterday and even over dinner about, this problem is, we see it like in the Eagleford. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear it from the Bakken. I didn't hear it from, I hear a little bit about, we still have issues up in the Marcellus and Utica areas in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Of course, there's such massive reserves up there, but I didn't hear anything about North Dakota shortfalls or the problem in North Dakota that you're going to have, just like the problem with in the Permian and elsewhere, is when there's a spread between West Texas and Brent, you're getting a discounted value, and I guess your concept of leave it in the ground, I like that. The problem is, I would think venture capital and producers, they all want cash flow, and if they invest and you're leaving it in the ground, your cash flow is being pushed out to the future, and Lord knows, what the value. And part of the problem too, Jason, with leaving it in the ground is there's so many people these days, wrongfully so, I think, have the impression that there's so much oil in the shale plays that all they have to do, we turn the key and it comes flooding out. And so if you leave it in the ground, it might not be worth a lot more in the future. In fact, it might be worth less because, OPEC's going to flood the market and Saudi Arabia is going to flood the market. And, Permian, we can produce as much as we want. I don't think any of that's true. I think Saudi Arabia is pumping pretty much flat out. I think Russia has a little bit of spare capacity, but not a whole lot. And they don't have an incentive really to flood the market or lower oil prices. And I do think, just with capacity and personnel and cost, the U.S. will continue to grow production, but nowhere near what we've seen the last couple of years, just because the efficiencies are declining as far as, we've sort of learned the technology of how much sand to use, how much water to use, how long to drill. There's an argument, too, with regard to Tier 1 and Tier 2 acreage. I mean, I'm hearing more and more people in industry, I mean, not analysts, but people in industry who have been around that know, that say, hey, we've drilled some of our best acreage in the Bakken and in the Permian and elsewhere, or maybe not the Permian, but maybe the Eagle Ford. The Bakken and Eagle Ford, I guess, are the two that I've heard most often mentioned. I don't understand, Tier 1 and Tier 2 acreage, but I've been told, or at least the argument goes from these experts that are running these firms, that Tier 2 acreage, regardless of the technology you use, are not going to be as good as the premium acreage. It's and so your increase in production, you just got to drill more to get an increase in production versus what we've had to do historically. So oil prices should be higher. And all this being said, the economy is blowing along globally and increasing demand of 1.5 million barrels per day on 100 million barrel per day level. So we're increasing every year 1 to 2% increase in demand, and then we have the decline rate where you drill a well and it declines substantially in the first year. So we're on a treadmill, and it's interesting to see how all these things fit together. And little did I know, or little would I have guessed, that we would have been short pipeline capacity to get stuff out of the Permian Basin down to the Gulf Coast. And actually, there's some systems going on. They're going to take some of the Permian crude is going to go over to Cushing, and in Cushing, apparently, there's the distribution from there is much more built out historically. So anyway, it's going to be exciting times.
Wanted to mention on the rail talk a little bit too. One of the things up in the Bakken they had a few years ago, of course, that's quite a distance to get it to the market from the Bakken. And so it's not as feasible to put it into a tanker truck and just drive it. Whereas, they need to rely on the rail a lot more. And there was an issue with agriculture. Obviously, ag is a big user of the rail, just like a lot of, import and exporting products coming and going from the Asian markets. The BNSF did a major investment, billions of dollars, to upgrade their cars, to upgrade their rail system, their switch terminals, etc. And was that talked about down there? I mean, you guys have some wheat being harvested down there, don't you? You guys have a harvest season right now down in Texas. So was ag brought into this? You mentioned the sand of the frac sand as one of the users of the rail cars, but I know ag is coming into the harvest season, and then it just kind of stays through for a while.
Yeah, actually, ag was mentioned in the presentation, but it is really the incremental. Apparently, gains of the last 5 years have been really sand and getting the stuff from Wisconsin down here. And there also has been some interesting articles recently dealing with Bakken crude. Apparently, the East Coast refiners have started shipping by train again. It was really popular several years ago, and then apparently it fell off to almost nothing 6 months to a year ago. And I think it was a Bloomberg article that was out that said, things are ramping up where some of these producers, and especially apparently, and I'm not sure what route they take, Jason, but apparently the Bakken crude is easier or closer to ship. If you're in Texas, you ship to the Gulf Coast. If you're in North Dakota, apparently, or Canadian crude too, apparently you can ship some of that stuff by oil to some of the eastern refiners, and that will be their cheapest feedstock. And so they're starting to ramp up the train shipments again, which, again, from an environmental standpoint, you actually was on a panel that we talked about some of the legal implications and the fact that a lot of environmentalists are targeting the midstream and pipelines to try to shut down the industry, but really what they're doing is you slow down the building of pipelines. You're increasing the number of trains that haul oil and other substances that, from an environmental standpoint, it's much more dangerous to haul that stuff on a railroad track than put it underground in a pipeline. And it was interesting to hear them talk, but they didn't talk too much about ag, but I know that is the other big profit center for the railroads. And again, just going back, from a railroad standpoint, if I was a railroad executive, it's like, well, why would I want to mess with shipping oil and setting up new terminals if I don't already have a terminal in the Permian, because this is only going to be a 2-year deal, so 2-year problem. It's going to be a big 2-year problem, but it'll only be a 2-year problem.
Joe Dancy with us, talking a little bit about some of the bottlenecking solutions and issues happening down in the Permian, as well as some of the other shale plays. And the trucker part, that's interesting to me for a number of reasons. And, you mentioned the environmental safety part of it. How about the traffic safety part of it? A lot of times pipeline producers will point out safety on the road and the safety on the rail, and the safety is a major part of the selling point of a pipeline. This to me would be one of those times where people could look at the oil companies and say, well, they're right now, because we don't have a pipeline, therefore we have to add more trucks, semis to the road, therefore making it less safe for the average person that's driving on a family vacation. Is that safe to say?
I would guess. I'm sure statistically you can really make that argument, and probably pretty powerful. And I know lately, actually one of my recent connections on LinkedIn was a nurse, and her job is she's chief drug officer or something at some service company out in Midland. And I emailed her and said, specifically, the reason I wanted to connect with you is, like, I saw your background, as a RN and as a trained physician's assistant. And she goes, yeah, she's been hired by a company out there. And she said that there is a major problem getting people who, when you drive a truck out, and I talked about this a little bit with some people at the conference yesterday. I mean, driving in Midland, the good news is you can see the visibility is good. You don't have massive snowstorms like you have up in the Bakken, and you don't have rain normally, but it's not real exciting. So if I was a truck driver, it would be very difficult for me not to at least drink a lot of coffee, and I wouldn't go past to use stimulants. But what she told me, the nurse, was that part of the problem they have is, number one, getting people to pass the drug test for the initial hire. Number two, to keep the people, just because they get hired away. And she goes, number three, this is not real exciting work, hauling water or hauling sand or hauling equipment, in the middle of the desert. And it's very easy to, fall prey to stimulants. And so she's going to be, I said, that's pretty interesting title, chief drug manager or whatever. I said, it's interesting, but it's
amazing.
It's a major issue, and it's a major, and as you note, it's a major safety issue, because Lord knows, you stay up too late and you're driving a big truck and you fall asleep, and Lord knows what happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, those trucks are, they're kind of rockets on wheels. I mean, they've got gas tanks, and some of them even carry hot oil and a number of different things. So, I mean, it's a safety thing. It's amazing, though, we've gotten to the point, 5,000-foot view society here, that, we've given up on the stimulants and drugs issues to the point to where we actually have to staff people now to manage the problem. It's the same thing in the Bakken. I was just up at the Williston Basin Conference, and one of the main themes up there, there's usually about a dozen or less themes that come out of it, because there's so many different areas of oil and gas. But drug testing, people cannot pass a drug test. There's so many different ways to, escape from reality these days, that a lot of these people they're failing the drug test out of the gate. And that seemed to be one of the biggest issues with employers. And Joe, I'm going to throw this in here. This was a very interesting conversation I had with someone off the air, and it had to do with the millennials. And I'm not trying to pick on the millennials. I'm just going to point something out here, and I want to get your reaction because I think it goes beyond the millennials too. But they were talking about this in sports. How a lot of the issue now in sports is these coaches are having a hard time connecting with the millennial athletes. And well, we got talking about how that's kind of true in the workplace as well, where a lot of the older guard, they have a hard time connecting with the millennials because they're kind of conditioned to believe, work should be fun and it should be experiential. And you start talking about that truck driving job, and I'm thinking of a 25-year-old trying to go through that. No wonder they want to escape from reality. I mean, no wonder we got drug officials now at companies. I mean, am I getting a little bit over dramatic here, or are you following my train of thought?
Yeah, I like your train of thought. That's interesting. I know in the teaching realm, some of the oldsters, I mean, I'm over 60, and I've been around a while, and, you sit around and talk to some of the professors, and they were talking about some of the students there, the undergraduate students, and how they really have a different attitude towards, I mean, Jason, when I went to school, it's like, gee, I need to study hard, I need to get a job, and they're have a much different philosophy, and I don't know whether it's the school, but I mean, some of the professors have said they've seen the change over the last 20 years of, where students came in and they were much more focused, and today they are, as you note, they're everything ought to be fun and easy, and gee, if it's too much work, we're not going to do it, and gee, these oil, and the other thing in this conversation with some of the professors, they said, one of their perceptions, and as part of it's the media, is that the oil and gas industry is so bad for the planet and so bad environmentally that, regardless of the jobs, we don't want to work there. I mean, we'd rather be working, scooping ice cream than, making $60,000 a year as a landman or land assistant somewhere out of college, and it's an interesting philosophy, and actually there's even we even had scholarship money available for oil and gas careers, and the students didn't even bother. We had 2 or 3. We told students to apply, and they didn't even, all I had to do was write a letter. And it's like, well, they left a couple $1,000 sitting on the table, and of course they were for oil and gas studies, but anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah, and it is a real problem, and it's one that I've seen as well. I mean, one of the reasons, like our program, we openly say we're non-political, and we do that by strategy. We say that so that people feel that there's a safe place to talk without being, put down or ridiculed for political views and that sort of thing, because that's the world of politics to where it's gone. And a lot of the millennials now, to go with your point a little bit, they do think like work should be fun, and they do think there should be experiences that, are memorable and that sort of thing. I always joke because, they always seem like they want to be somewhere else. So they're on their phones or they're doing something else. And that just seems like a whole different shift when it comes to employment. I was talking with Cindy Sanford. She's in charge of North Dakota Job Service up there up at the Williston Basin Bakken Conference last week. And she brought up a very, very interesting point that a lot of the younger generation that come in to get jobs do not know how to use a computer. They know how to use their smartphone, but they do not know how to use a computer. Think about that. That is an incredible shift that happened, I guess, while I was going to the bathroom or taking a coffee break, because how, on one hand, someone can know how to use a smartphone so well, and they're very proficient with it. But on the other hand, they don't know how to use a computer. But the industry seems to be shifting more towards that smartphone, almost like accommodating them a little bit. I don't know. It just that was mind blowing to me that they didn't know how to use a computer. So
that's interesting. It doesn't that is surprising. And I do know. I will tell you, Commissioner Wayne Christian down here at the Texas Railroad Commission. The Railroad Commission realizes we have a shortage of qualified people, and actually even unskilled people that can be trained by industry, and there are good jobs out there. And he's put together a commission, apparently, or a group of people down in, I guess he's down in Austin with the Railroad Commission to, try to match up the younger millennials and younger, or anybody who's unemployed that wants a job, a good job, with the energy sector, not only oil, but everything across pipelines, refiners, and because Texas, just like North Dakota, we have a pretty dynamic economy, and there are openings that are not being filled, and he realized that. So apparently the companies are telling him, geez, this would be great for us, and obviously it'd be great for the state, more people that are working, and it's great for the individuals. You develop a skill set when you're young, and you may start in the oil field, but you may end up running your own restaurant or hotel or trucking company or something, but you can't get to running your own company, unless you have the basic skill set. And anyway, he's working on that. I applauded him for that. He's a good commissioner. Yeah,
I've had him on the program before. I really enjoyed him. In fact, he was the one that kind of broke the seal on the Millennial Talk, if you will. It was kind of, mutter, kind of quiet because there was such a huge push for the millennials over the last 5 to 6 years. He was one of the first ones to kind of stand up and say, okay, let's take a step back here and see what kind of issues we now have to solve. And that was one of them, was that. The perception was another one that he brought up as well. And, I'll be honest, Joe, when I got into this whole thing back in 2012, 2011, I got into it as an investigative reporter for oil and gas, meaning I thought it was going to be like shooting fish in a barrel, doing investigative stories, that sort of thing. And it didn't take me more than 5 minutes to change my business plan, because I saw, first of all, that oil and gas was one of the last real capitalistic arteries out there. They do get some tax credits and some subsidies and yada yada type thing, but for the most part, it's a pure capitalist game out there. I mean, you've got companies doing business back and forth. You've got entrepreneurs being built overnight. Like, for example, ethanol is subsidized to the point to where if it was gone, it wouldn't be an industry. Oil and gas is not like that. That's what I'm trying to say. And the other thing that,
exactly.
Yeah, and the other thing that really stood out to me that I just think oil and gas does not get enough credit is they're really the last leaders in the free world, if you will, that are still connected to the local economy better than anybody else, better than the local politicians. I'll even go that far. A lot of the politicians now, they are either busy fundraising or busy trying to stay elected or trying to play the politics of things. So they're so focused on certain groups and certain this and that they forget about the people working at, I don't know, Oasis Petroleum and the people working at the local, gas stations, etc. Whereas the oil and gas executives, they have to stay connected to those local people. Otherwise, their businesses don't work. Do you know what I mean by that, Joe?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of good jobs, and most people don't realize the extent of the energy sector. I mean, not only oil and gas, but I mean, you also look at the, coal, refining, chemical plant. I mean, chemical. A lot of the feedstock stock is oil and gas, and chemical plants. Again, they're with the feedstock prices, West Texas differential. These refiners, chemical plants, producers, pipelines, and again, a lot of it's localized. Railroads. The economic stimulus you get from that, Jason, is you can't give a tax break to equal the stimulus of just the energy sector.
Oh, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, when you drive through the small towns and you can see it on a microcosm like that, it's amazing. And then you go through like a Tulsa, or you go through a Dickinson or a Williston, or any of those medium-sized towns, you can see the progression of how that energy economy really built the town. At least that's what I've seen driving through shale play. I like to call it Shale Play USA because it's a fun time out there. I enjoy the industry a lot, as I can tell you do as well from the passion in your voice. So let's kind of wrap up here. I'm just looking at the time. Talk to me a little bit about how your involvement is with the oil and gas industry. We'll kind of wrap up that a little bit. Give yourself a plug for what you do and why you're an expert and et cetera. So talk to me about your involvement in the industry.
All right, Jason. Yeah, I'm at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. We have an energy center. We actually have a master's online program. And actually, some of the people in the field, so you don't have to come to Norman to get a master's in energy law. You're not a lawyer, but you learn all about the legal principles, et cetera. And I'm involved with that program and a professor there. And we're doing a lot of really interesting research on the use of drones in the oil field, cybersecurity in the oil field, just rulemaking, and I'm involved with the Railroad Commission and Texas Commissioner Christensen, because he's on the Interstate Oil and Gas Commission, and I'm the Texas representative, and yeah, we rub shoulders quite a bit with the folks in North Dakota. In fact, Lynn Helms, who's at the Oil and Gas Division up there of North Dakota, was telling me that their agency has 6 licensed drone operators, and they're flying drones all over up there, for regulatory purposes, and it's a program they're building. So that's my function. I'm sort of a academic on the loose in the industry, and obviously I love it. I think it's interesting. I think the students, there's tremendous careers ahead if they choose to go there.